We are back.
Yep, we're here again.
We're here. People want to know what we're going to talk about today. Let's get straight into it. So I think the topic for today is Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir, has come out again on one of these podcasts and started talking crazy. He started sending real shots for OpenAI and Anthropic at the frontier models, and he started to lead a conversation on effectively closed private frontier models versus open source multiple models and how the market should go. Again, for anyone who doesn't know Palantir, they're kind of one of these data layer orchestration companies. I think they call it ontology. I still don't even, to be honest, go and someone go Google AI, what that actually means. I think he coined it as a term. My understanding is it's part of the software that owns the data layer to orchestrate AI applications. So he's got a stake in the conversation. He's got a voice. But John, what I wanted to hear from you is, and I know you watched the interview, talk to me, one, about what were your initial reactions, and two, where do you sit on the spectrum of the US needing frontier versus open source models and capabilities, across security, products, share. Yeah, talk to me about where you sit on that spectrum.
Yeah, so I saw that interview and I was like, wow. Yeah. Like it literally made my mouth drop because I think we've all known Alex Karp to be not your usual kind of CEO, really. Yeah. But I think that was a bit much because I was surprised at how hard he seemed to be coming for the current frontier guys. And to be honest, I see what he was trying to say, and I understand what he was trying to say. The way he went about it, I don't know about that, because he really made it obvious and he made it clear that he didn't like the current frontier guys. He didn't like the way they're doing things. He doesn't like the way they're pricing. He doesn't like how much money they're making from their pricing. It makes me think maybe you just don't like how big they are, but okay. But yeah, he spoke about how they're charging based on tokens. He spoke about also how they really shouldn't be the one controlling all of this. And for any company, any serious company, according to him, if you're a serious company, you want to have your own weights private. You don't want to be using what a private company controls. And he also insinuated that these companies are basically taking your data and training on it and using it to develop their own stuff. I don't know if I can't confirm or deny that, but he definitely insinuated that. And he was saying, you're just giving them your stuff. They're looking at everything you're doing. They're training you're training their things. So you're like, you people need to be careful. And you need to basically move to open source. And so part of the conversation as well, because right before he did that podcast, they had a partnership with NVIDIA when NVIDIA released this open source models. And then basically Palantir is going to be the orchestrator. It's going to be the brains behind the model. Sounds very convenient. So basically what he's trying to say is you want to host your stuff yourself. Yeah. You want to host this NVIDIA models. You want to host the models, and then obviously you need a brain to understand all of this for you, and then to connect to your own company data, your workspace, and to do this for you. And he's saying you don't need to do this on the cloud. He was also making a point saying that currently you're getting finessed with the charges they're giving you. They're trying to make you think token maxing is the way to go, and you're getting charged based on your tokens and all of this. But he was saying once you own your own models, tokens are essentially free. Obviously, maybe you'll pay for your compute, but you can run your own compute yourself, and it's just plug and play. Any amount of tokens you're getting, you're no longer paying for that. The only thing you'll pay for is their own layer on top of it, which will do the orchestration for you. But he was trying to also say they wouldn't charge. They're no longer charging you token based anymore because they're not using tokens. They charge you more for value. So if they're able to create value for you, obviously I don't know how they'll determine that, but that's the gist I got. And they charge you value based and no longer token based. And like I said, while I don't necessarily agree with the way he went about saying things, I think it makes a lot of sense to me because I don't think it's scalable anymore with the way the price of these things have been going. I think from a security perspective, even if we don't know for sure what companies are doing in closed doors, but from a security perspective, if you're a serious company and for example, let's imagine a company like Mythos was doing a company like Anthropic rather released Mythos and like they were using another company to do all of the training. That company already knows everything that's going on, like for that kind of sensitive and important technology release. So I think from a security perspective, I think it needs to go open source. I don't think everyone using these closed source companies is scalable. And even though I know this is saying this to benefit them, I think that has to be the way to go eventually. And the problem there that people mention is that you want to use the most powerful frontier models. But I think for most things that people do, you don't actually need the most powerful frontier models. Your everyday inference that you do, and also considering the risk as well, like is it really worth it? But yeah, I think that's my take. I think I agree that it needs to be open source. Open source has to be the way to go. It is the only one right now that seems scalable. Companies are cutting back on how people spending because they're just not able to afford. Like if you cannot afford it, then nothing is going to happen anyways. So you might just have to go open source eventually.
Bro, I'm not gonna lie, yeah. I thought the whole thing was completely ridiculous. I was astounded at what I was watching. I could not believe what I was watching. To me, that came across as a guy who has got a clear vested interest. And he even, full disclosure, said that his own company is effectively creating software to orchestrate as many of these open source models as possible, or that's how it will get the most value. So he openly said that. 2, he started making criticisms about the revenue model, saying why do they not do shared outcomes? Bear in mind, these guys a lot of what they're doing is service revenue themselves. It's not always tied to an outcome. A lot of the time it's built on hours. So we talk about being like hypocritical. Well, where's that coming from? I didn't see anyone saying this to Salesforce. Like, do you know what that's the equivalent of that is saying? That's the equivalent of saying to Salesforce, nah, we don't charge you for the license or the software or the database. You'll only pay us when you close deals. that's what he's saying. And again, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Why is everyone trying to hold Anthropic and OpenAI to a completely different standard to everyone else? And we know the answer. It's because they're growing quicker and people don't like it. So they said, okay, well, you're growing too quick. Well, you have to do something else then. You have to start moving to this goalpost now. The revenue model point made absolutely no sense. It was a ridiculous thing to say. What I do, I think that there's an interesting conversation on the security side. And for me, actually, before we even get to security side, I want to just come back to this pricing point in just a little bit more detail as well. You just reminded me. So, token maxing was a choice. Token maxing was a choice. No one at Anthropic or OpenAI told these guys, you have to token max. They chose to do that themselves. Was it going to be sustainable? No. Was it a good idea? No. It was the stupidest thing ever. It was obviously never going to be something that lasted at scale. They chose to do it. It seems to have gone out of fashion now and is happening less. Yet Anthropic has just crossed 50 billion in ARR from latest private unconfirmed sources, but from what we understand, they've just crossed 50 billion in ARR and that's, annual recurring revenue for anyone who's new to this. 50 billion revenue run rate for a 3.5-year-old company. So when this Alex Karp guy is going on these podcasts and saying that, everyone's frustrated and, they're about to start ripping out these models, the data ain't showing that, big man. We're looking at a company that is growing at an unprecedented rate, the biggest and fastest growing company ever in the history of technology. Let's please get serious about what we're doing here. Let's not you can have an opinion, but let's not lie. Let's not lie. Let's talk facts. So that's where I stand. I just want to get all that kind of revenue growth. I just want to get all of that. Just make sure that is obliterated and not taken seriously as a serious argument. It is not by any stretch of the imagination.
Fair.
I think where you can have interesting conversations when you start thinking about the privacy and the security concerns. Is it beyond the realms of possibility that an Anthropic or OpenAI is looking at this data and looking what people are trying to achieve with this AI and taking inspiration from it? No, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. It's possibly true. As you say, it's unconfirmed either way. I actually want to flip the conversation and look at the risk from the other side, though.
Okay.
So you got a choice at this point, right? In terms of the extent to which you deploy these kind of frontier private cloud models or these open source models and potentially deploy them locally, right? So it's well documented the risk of an OpenAI or an Anthropic taking your data and doing evil things with it, right? What I think's underappreciated is what is the risk of these locally deployed open source models that might have some sort of kind of malware or some sort of malpractice within them that then starts to, dictate harmful behaviors on your local devices. So I haven't really heard anyone talk about that. And for me, it's something that I keep thinking, right? You're trading off the risk of these open source models from potentially less credible partners, and a lot of them foreign as well. So whether that's a Chinese open source model or Chinese open source provider, what if they have an ulterior motive in what they're getting you to deploy locally? Why is no one talking about that?
I feel like the general consensus on open source is it is safer eventually. And the reason I think this is because anyone can have access to it. So whenever any models are deployed, people are able to vet it, they're able to look at it, they're able to then determine if there's any risk or not. And once it gets flagged, the whole community knows. It's difficult to be able to release open. Mind you, it does happen. It does happen. We've had like massive vulnerabilities, and we've heard about. There was a recent Axios one. There was one recently that there have been very popular ones that have happened, and then people realize that this is installed in almost everybody's software, and this went unseen for a while. But generally, that is like highly coordinated, very sophisticated for that to happen and go unseen. And what you then see is the risk is potentially higher for a close company because you don't, aside the fact that they could be looking at your data and all of that, if a company gets breached by whatever means, and like we've seen things like that happen, like data breaches with companies and all of that, and they come out and announce, if your data leaves with them, your whatever leaves with them, that the hackers are actually able to infiltrate and get all these things out, it wouldn't have the whole community to be able to protect you as much. Because when these large data breaches happen, everyone is hands on deck. All the big companies, everyone is hands on deck on how to immediately mitigate this. Like everyone's working together because everyone is going to be affected. So everyone is hands on deck on how to come up with the mitigations. Companies are already speaking. In fact, sometimes they do. Usually, once these vulnerabilities are found, it goes to most of the big companies first, so they can patch all the software that is out there. Because obviously, if they get affected, then it can get catastrophic. So I think the general idea is open source protects you in a way because everyone can see. And while yes, there is the risk that if that did happen, then that'll be very big trouble. But people just generally feel like, I would rather have something that everyone can see. There's always the risk of being hacked, always the risk of malware or something being planted there that we don't really understand. But people generally go with, I would rather take that risk than a company that can be breached and hacked or whatever, and then everything I'm sending there is being siphoned to someone else. But I think, like you said, the conversation is worth having because also the now we're hosting models. It's slightly different from like software and all of that. We're hosting models. I don't know in details how the risk is completely different from software and how easy or hard it is to hide stuff in models as but you can imagine like if a model is completely trained away from your eyes, it's very possible that model has instructions or things that tells it to be able to hide some of its thinking, because even recently there was Anthropic was doing a thing saying they realized like Claude had some internal thinking space that he never realized, and almost like he has his own consciousness, probably part of the marketing, but because even models themselves are not completely understood, and even the companies that make them are finding new things about them. You can imagine like some company in China figures out a way that they can add some things in the model that obviously no one completely understands. There's potentially a risk that no one is really thinking about or realizing yet. So it's definitely worth talking about. It's definitely worth talking about.
Because you take that to the extreme, right? And you talked about sophisticated, coordinated, let's just say for whatever reason, let's just for argument's sake, say Chinese government got together with one of these, like a DeepSeek, just as an example, and said, yeah, we want to go and wipe out or create some sort of surveillance, or we want to create some sort of malware that will take offline a lot of the US defense operations, just as an example. The question of trust then elevates to, is it, private, frontier, closed, or open source? It then elevates to which providers do we trust more? And I don't think it is an obvious conclusion that you trust the open source providers more than the frontier models, right? And again, I know Alex has been talking really loud and, giving all, 10 to 100 reasons why it should be obvious that you trust open source more. Again, just think about who is the provider. I don't think, from what I can see at the minute in the US, there aren't massive open source providers from what I can see right now. Not to the scale or extent of the other ones we've been talking about for the whole podcast. So for me, it's not a foregone conclusion. And I think ultimately, the other funny thing I thought about the whole conversation or podcast is that ultimately, what I always thought from the beginning, and what I still think to this day, I say from the beginning, from probably 2023, and what I still think to this day now of how this is going to end up and land is every organization, company, government is going to deploy a combination of the private frontier models and the open source lower cost models. There's going to be new, novel, innovation cases, discovery cases that are going to need new capabilities to be able to push businesses forward. It's a perfect use case for these frontier models. They command a higher margin for it. And that, to me, that just makes sense as a well-structured market. There is also, from what I can understand, going to be probably a greater by volume market for open source, where the model was then deployed. Potentially, you've done some testing on what you want the process or outcome to look like. You then deploy an open source lower cost model to run it. And you kind of probably get to that 80-20, open versus private, orchestration of the models. There's an interesting opportunity there for who's going to orchestrate those models and optimize the token usage to, select the right tasks and all that and that kind of relationship. But for me, the conversation of this disingenuous conversation of, is OpenAI and Anthropic going to collapse in favor of an open source environment? It's just nonsense.
I honestly, even if I support the open source, I genuinely feel like he sounded like, Alex Karp sounded like he doesn't like that they've taken center stage. Because obviously, everyone has been talking about Palantir before now, how they're doing amazing, they're having great, they're doing everything. Before you mentioned AI, okay, Palantir did AI, but now it's just seems like this new kids on the block have surpassed them in valuations and revenue and everything. So to be honest, it did seem a bit saucy in that
I think they're 5 to 10x bigger and versus a company that's been around for 10 or 10, 12 years. It's a 3-year-old company is 5 or 10x bigger. So you can see why he's hating. But that's how it came across to me. And how it is. I'll say it exactly as I see it, bro. So that's how that came across to me, man. Cool. All right, man. Was there any other kind of any other thoughts that were coming to you as you were thinking around this private versus open, this frontier versus open? I think as I said, I just want to reinforce and land the point. For me, I do see the sustainable margins from the frontier models. I don't think it's even a viable end state, if there is an end state. I don't think it's a viable continuum that a government or serious institution doesn't have the frontier capability, actually, especially for governments.
Yeah.
Imagine you're allowing other governments to have the equivalent of Fable 20. And it's now trying to attack and, create some sort of cyber warfare. You're going to lose.
Yeah. To be fair, one conversation that has been had, obviously, like just regarding what you said, is that the open source don't get as good as the frontier because they can't spend as much. They don't have the funding. But one pattern that we've seen really is the frontier are usually first with the best models, but the open source catches up very fast. There was recently a GLM model, one of the open source models that was released, and some people obviously, it's a bit of like, okay, maybe they had interest in, but some people are saying it's starting to perform at the level of the Mythos, maybe not at the level, but very close to the level of the Mythos and the latest OpenAI model.
Well, how quick?
How quick?
Yeah, how quick did it catch up?
So it's before now, it seemed like the open source models was taking like 12 months or thereabout. But more recently, even if you consider that it might not be that good, but it has to be really good to be able to even say it's on par. It seems like it's cut down to about 3 months now.
Okay.
So, and it seems like they're figuring out more smarter ways to be able to, I don't know if they mimic the models or they distill them, but they're figuring out smarter ways. So Anthropic goes and figures out the hard way to do the thing, or OpenAI figures out the hard way. And once they see, they're like, okay, cool, we can see the end product.
Samsung way.
We know how to get there now. And it seems like they're speeding up in how well they're able to do it. So that's just another caveat there, that open source models might actually start to catch up quicker. They'll still always be behind.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to, because what is the upper limit there of the gap though? So, lower limit. What's the lower limit of the gap, right? Because if we got it down to 3 months, for me, that's still big, particularly in those government use cases we talked about.
Sure.
That's still more than enough time for an Anthropic or OpenAI to become a multi-trillion-dollar company. What are you? How fast or how small do you envisage that gap becoming in terms of the number of months between a frontier model releasing its latest version and an open source version being able to replicate a similar capability?
Yeah, at least a month, definitely.
Okay.
At least a month, maybe a month to 2 months. I don't really see it getting lower than that. And I think what they're gonna try to start doing, and it seems like what they're doing now, is they're gonna be limiting people who have access to those frontier models. They're gonna say only you has access, and so they can very well monitor to make sure that they're not able to catch up that quickly. So I guess in that case, probably the frontier models would only go to like the government and like one of the top people. And later on, they would then allow it to distill down. So the US government can probably always stay ahead of the curve.
All right, man. Look, it's been a good one. I'm highly curious. I'm highly curious on where that's gonna land. As I say, for me, it's gonna land in a steady state of 70-30, 80-20 in favor of open source for more, repeatable, well-known processes. 20 or 30 for these new frontier, innovative, exploratory, discovery type use cases, which every business and every organization needs to have.
Yeah.